Hello everyone, this is part 19 of What If Naruto Was a Puppeteer, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, and check out the playlist, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
So, what do we know about the land of fangs? Naruto asked, reclining against the back of the ornate palanquin as it trundled west along the thick highway that almost cut Hai no Kuni in two. Hanabi sighed, forced to walk behind the litter as there was only space for one person and it was apparently Naruto's prerogative to call Junin privilege. It had been nothing but questions since they had left the capital, new escort firmly in tow. Longtime neutral principality to the west of Am no Kuni, in a constant state of feuding with the land of claws. Serves as one of the buffer states between Iwagakure and Sunagakure. Main exports are precious stones, a special kind of silk, and copper, which funds the nation's enormous food deficiency thanks to their general lack of arable farmland. No hidden village, outsources majority of business to Iwagakure. And a bunch of uncultured Philistines, the lot of them, the young man riding in the palanquin itself called back, fanning himself despite the shade his litter offered. Actually, Hanabi corrected, despite the fact that it was early October and Fire Country's infamously sweltering summer was long since over. The sooner this farce of a diplomatic mission is over, the sooner I can get back to civilization again. She had been somewhat surprised to find that the man they were escorting was in fact a cousin to the daimyo himself, although only distantly in line for the office. There was no shinobi clever enough to make that many assassinations not look suspicious, so he was a fairly inconsequential person. It didn't make him any more tolerable. Just 18 years old and he was already comfortably settling into the snobby disdain that made nobles the bane of a ninja's career. It didn't help that she drew unconscious parallels between him and Naruto, being around the same age. It was a stark commentary on how very differently life could turn out for people, if nothing else. There must have been some reason you were chosen for this assignment though. She asked, hoping to strike up conversation so that Naruto could continue to pepper her with various socio-economic questions. She appreciated that he wanted her to be prepared for anything, but unless they ran into a madman threatening to destroy Fang Country's gem mines to destabilize the delicate economic balance they shared with the tenuous neighbor, she wasn't sure how much of it was strictly relevant. I am not assigned to do anything, child, the teen huffed, waving his fan more forcefully. But for your information, Daimyo-sama simply understands to entrust these affairs to the best people he can. It can be truly burdensome to be this brilliant, you know. I'm sure, she muttered back, already regretting her decision. Naruto smirking at her knowingly was not helping. Although, the noble mused, tone turning conspiratorial as he leaned back slightly, never turning around of course, it wouldn't do to make eye contact with the help. Between us, it's fair to wonder what the daimyo is thinking these days. The palace is practically aflame with rumors of the strange decisions he has taken to as of late. I mean really, a political envoy to the land of fangs. We haven't spoken so much as a word to those swine in decades. Just about when the feud between them and the land of claws began, if I recall correctly, Naruto drawled absently, keeping an eye on the surrounding forests. The young noble seemed thrown by the observation for a moment, before recovering with a tactful sniff. Precisely, such petty border conflicts are far beneath our notice. And the fact this envoy might be construed as tacit approval of one side over the other in this conflict has, I'm sure, been taken into account by Daimyo-sama, the blonde continued. After all, it is well known that the daimyo of Tsuchi no Kuni has been endorsing the land of claws for a few years now. The flutter of the fan paused for only a moment before it resumed its steady sway. Of course, and I don't particularly care for your insinuation, Shinobi-san. Naruto immediately affected a humbled tone that clashed horribly with his bored, dispassionate features. It wasn't like the noble was looking. I intended no offense. After all, you yourself said that Daimyo-sama has only chosen the very best as his representative in this delicate affair. Any implications on his state of mind or in his choices, was purely unintentional. The noble huffed acceptingly, ego-soothed. Although Hanabi couldn't help but note that Naruto hadn't actually denied the implications. I suppose it is not unfair to speculate on such things, the young fop admitted. With the passing of Daimyo-sama wife, some changes in personality are to be expected. In fact, just the other day, Hanabi tuned out the latest in court gossip, turning to Naruto and asking in a hushed voice, "The daimyo's wife is dead." He shrugged. The news won't have really left the capital yet. The matter's still under investigation by Konoha and they like to keep it hush until foul play's ruled out. Well, you could have told me, she muttered back. Oh, I'm sorry, he shot back with an amused smirk. Would you also like to know that the lightning daimyo enjoys his breakfasts unusually spicy, or that the latest in noble fashion is felt fabrics because the daimyo accidentally wore his bathrobe to court the other day? Hanabi just blinked. He did. Wait, just how much information do you get through your network, anyway? His answer was a mysterious little smile that told her nothing. Never mind, but it pans, right? If the daimyo is acting out of character. The blonde shrugged again, settling back into the palanquin. Actually, that's pretty normal for him. I've only had to deal directly with the daimyo a few times, and he's a bit of a... He waved his hand, and one of the samurai trailing the procession, young by his voice, helpfully chimed in, a buffoon. Naruto snapped his fingers and nodded appreciatively at the man. Yes, thank you, non-existent guard that I didn't just hear say anything. The samurai seemed to take the subtle hint and thankfully remained quiet after that. Being so blasé about his superiors could land him in hot water. You've met the daimyo, you say? The noble chimed in, apparently done serenading himself with the sound of his own voice. He sounded skeptical to say the least, and for good reason. The daimyo rarely dealt with any shinobi beside the Hokage himself. Twice actually, Naruto admitted with a grimace. The first for a mission, and the second, he coughed into his hand, and Hanabi was actually astonished to see the very faintest hints of red in his cheeks, also for a mission. The noble hummed, unconvinced. What did you say your name was again, Ninja-san? Uzumaki Naruto, he drawled with a roll of his eyes. They had been introduced at the capital. Ah yes, the teen clicked his fingers as if it was some great revelation that had been withheld from him. I had thought the name familiar. You are the performer. Puppeteer, Naruto corrected. Quite the same thing, is it not? Unfortunately, before Naruto could explain the difference, the procession came to an abrupt halt. It nearly caused the snarky young samurai to trip into Hanabi, only saved from a pratfall by her own grace. A few of his comrades glanced around curiously, but Naruto was already moving, pushing off the palanquin and withdrawing a scroll. Hanabi, eyes. She activated her Byakugan and blinked, surprised at how quickly their ambushes had managed to surround them. She had been checking every 5 minutes after all, and her vision now covered almost half a kilometer in every direction. That also implied a certain awareness of her ability and the interval with which she was using it, which was troubling in and of itself. 10 of them, Chunin at best. Those estimates were of course based off their relative chakra levels. Those became somewhat difficult to judge around Naruto, who burned with enough light to make everyone else seem like Genin in comparison. At her declaration, the blonde flexed his hands once, grinned, and looked at her as if to say, well, what are we waiting for? She felt her own excitement bubbling up, despite the odds, and quickly withdrew Kasai from a compartment hidden in her voluminous kimono sleeves. A cheerful yellow affair with orange highlights and tied with a deep red obi, over the top of equally red, skin-tight shorts. She wasn't sure how attached she was to the look yet, having tried a few different outfits at the onset of her Genin career. The blue flames of her puppet roared to life as Inari puffed into existence, the elegant fox-based puppet making her feel self-conscious about her own, simpler design. She tried to put that out of her mind as she moved towards the first of the attackers, all of them aiming right for the palanquin. The first thing she noticed was a complete lack of headband on any of their ambushers' persons. Likewise, they seemed to be doing their absolute best to conceal their identities with dark hoods, bandanas and eye makeup. She took all that in as Kasai approached the first of them, pulsing brightly with her controller's excitement. The man drew a tanto from his back, holding it somewhat awkwardly in a two-handed grip. Hanabi's eyes caught all the little details that told her he was used to a much longer blade, and was planning to use that to her advantage. She would entangle the blade in Kasai's wires before using the puppet to commandeer the man. His comrades might be more hesitant to attack if their friend was in the way. That was the plan anyway. Before she could get close, the glittery streak that was Inari suddenly interposed herself between them. She whirled around, slapping the attacker aside with one of her tails before darting off to deal with the next one in line. It wasn't even a contest. The assailants might have had the rough chakra levels of Chunin, but they hardly moved like them. In a flash, Inari had neatly incapacitated all 10 of them with sheer speed alone, not even having to tap into any of her built-in weaponry. Hanabi would have been rather enraptured by the display, if she wasn't so frustrated by it. Naruto-sensei, you didn't leave any for me. The blonde just blinked at her in confusion. What are you talking about? We got 'em all, didn't we? She just grunted her annoyance, doing her best not to look like a petulant child throwing a tantrum, but definitely feeling like one was deserved. It's AC rank, sensei. We know you can do it easily. How am I supposed to learn anything if you just deal with everything for me? I'm your sensei, it's my job to protect you. Why would I put you at unnecessary risk? You just don't get it, she muttered, walking off to check the area for any more ambushes and muttering about overbearing sensei. Naruto turned to the samurai that had spoken up before, eyebrow quirked. I'm not being overbearing, am I? Sensei is supposed to protect their students. I thought that was how it worked. The samurai in question seemed a bit like a deer staring down a jutsu, raising his hands uncertainly. Well, I don't really know how shinobi do things. He seemed to shore up some more courage when Naruto didn't immediately bite his head off. But with the samurai, such behavior would be seen as counterproductive. To coddle a soldier is to ensure they're killed later down the line. My Shushu always said that he would train us so hard, and put us in dangerous situations, so that when the enemy attacked it would be easy in comparison. So, you're saying I should let her fight people she might not be ready for? The man shrugged. I guess so, but isn't it also the sensei's job to have faith in their students? The blonde hummed thoughtfully at that. It rang of truth, similar to how he had treated himself as a kid, always throwing himself into the worst situations, or failing at creating them. Except, he was trying so hard to get away from the cold, callous person he had been. Was dipping back into that side of him for the best here. The logical side of him knew that moderation was probably key, but he wasn't so sure he could dip in and out of those dark waters so flippantly. He thought on it as he walked over to where the rest of the samurai cohort had already strung up the assailants, leaving them in a neat pile to the side of the road. He whipped the hood off of one, but found no immediate telling signs about his origin, no headband or insignia. A few more hoods came off, and all Naruto could really glean was that they were Fire Country natives, although certainly not Konoha ninja. Surprisingly, the answer came from behind him as he tore off the last hood, a surprised exclamation from one of the samurai guards. Genji. The guard strode forward for a better look, confirming his suspicions. I know this man, he's a part of the Daimyo's legion. A samurai then? Naruto asked, glancing back at the brown-haired man curiously. What would samurai be doing attacking a fire noble's procession, never mind a diplomatic mission? His mind immediately ground through who might benefit most from this particular envoy not reaching its target, but came up blank. Noble politics could be pretty damn opaque, and for all he knew this was just a personal grudge. More than just the daimyo commanded the legion named for him. What do we do now? The befuddled man asked, staring down at the bound man with an indecipherable expression. Naruto's answer was to have Inari pick the prisoner up and sling him over her shoulder, walking him into the tree line. Simple, we get some answers. The guard looked uncertain. He's a samurai, ninja-san. Whatever you do to him, he won't talk. Naruto just smiled, letting his canines peek through. We'll see. Naruto found Hanabi, totally not sulking, at the front of the procession. Despite her Byakugan being active, she didn't so much as turn to him when he approached. I'm guessing you interrogated one of our attackers. What is it now? Off to go deal with everything again and leave me here to guard the prissy ponce in the palanquin. You were right, Naruto admitted, taking the wind out of her sails. I should have let you test yourself against a few of the attackers. She turned with a roll of her eyes. It's not just that. It's all the questions, the constant lecturing. It's treating me like some kid who doesn't know what they're doing. It's the fact that you haven't even let me try. One of the things that made being your captive so tolerable was the fact that, despite my imprisonment, being with you actually felt like being free. I was free to learn what I wanted, train how I wanted. Now all of a sudden you turn into my father. I might as well be back at the compound. I already said you were right, don't push it. He sighed when she leveled a glare at him. It might have been intimidating, if she wasn't a good foot shorter than him. Look, I admit I was being a little overbearing. For the last couple years I've been doing my very best to make up for all the shit I pulled when I was younger, and sometimes it feels like no matter what I do, it won't be enough. I don't even know how many deaths are on my hands, unintentionally or not, because of that war. He ran a hand through his hair, uncomfortable sharing this much. It just wasn't something he did. Because of it, I haven't been treating you like a student. I've been treating you like somebody under my protection, like a client. But I know the best way to keep you safe is to make sure you can protect yourself, and constantly getting in your way isn't going to do that. He rubbed his nose, smiling bemusedly. Kami, sometimes I wonder if Kakashi actually knew what he was doing when he was so blasé about our training. His head dropped back down and he made sure to catch Hanabi's eye. Look, bottom line is that, for as much as being a student is new to you, being a teacher is new to me too. We're sort of learning how to do this at the same time, so I admit, I don't really have all the answers. All I know is puppets, and an increasingly long list of ways to kill people. And a lot of not so useless trivia about just about everything thanks to your ambiguously complex spy network, Hanabi added in, throwing him a bone. He smirked and nodded. And that. I'm sorry too, I just saw you protecting me like that and it made me think of how overprotective my family can be sometimes and I probably overreacted a bit. You're a good teacher, but I get that you're used to controlling every little detail and having a loose variable like me must be frustrating. The blonde waved his hand airily. I wouldn't say frustrating, he smirked when he caught her flat stare. I'm kidding. Hanabi, you know me, probably better than anybody else alive. If I didn't want you as an apprentice, you wouldn't be. I chose this, so you know damn well that I'm going to try and be the best damn master I can be, even if it takes a bit of trial and error. Hanabi couldn't help but match his smile, letting out a long exhale. I'm still not calling you Shushu. Worth a shot. So, wanna know what we're up against? Hanabi crouched in a tree, observing the small campsite with her Byakugan and making note of the patrol's steady routes around the perimeter. She thought Naruto's 180 on the matter was a little extreme, but she couldn't deny that having operational command was exhilarating. Naruto had listened quite patiently as she laid out her little plan, and at the end of it admitted that it had a certain elegance he enjoyed. The samurai listening in had called it unnecessarily complicated when Naruto had already demonstrated the ability to handily defeat the rogue group. To that, both shinobi had turned to him and quite succinctly told him that he just didn't understand ninja. How could they? Samurai were just soldiers, the rank and file of the daimyo's forces. While they could grow just as strong as ninja with the right training, they never truly had the flair for the bloody business shinobi possessed. It turned out that the ambusher Naruto had interrogated, which Hanabi did not need to know the details of, didn't know much about why they were attacking this particular convoy, except that it wasn't random. He only knew what his superior, a rather well-known samurai captain by all accounts, had ordered him to do. It was the captain they needed, and Naruto had allowed Hanabi the honor of planning their little assault. The remainder of the samurai guard had been left behind to attend to the noble, and she occasionally cast her gaze back to make sure nothing untoward happened in their absence. She was sure Naruto was doing the same thing. Right now though, she was focused on the scene in front of her. At the exact right moment, just as a couple of the patrols were about to emerge back into the campsite, she whistled through her hands, imitating a particular bird. When the patrols came back, they weren't alone. It was like 10 of the men had simply been doubled, with identical clones following them into the clearing. Then one of the men, who she knew must be a clone, turned to one of the real samurai with wide eyes. Who the hell are you? Similar exclamations filled the air as the various samurai turned on the doppelgangers. It was loud enough to arouse the interest of their leader, who emerged from his command tent with an irritated expression. What's going on here? One of the men, clone or not she couldn't tell, pointed at his doppelganger. A dirty shinobi trick, sir, to seed confusion amongst our ranks. I've seen it before, they're just insubstantial illusions. He moved towards his supposed illusory twin and took a swipe. Hanabi grinned as the other man vanished in a sudden burst of smoke, apparently confirming the accusation. What the rest of them didn't realize, was that he was a hanged dummy, and the man he had just accused had been pulled underground, disguised by a dropped smoke bomb. Chaos immediately broke out in the ranks as the samurai waiting in the camp turned on their comrades. 3 men, caught off guard by their friends' attacks, died instantly as they were cut down by their allies. It took a few more moments for anyone to realize something was wrong, and only then did the hanged dummy puppets turn on him, furthering the chaos. Meanwhile, Hanabi had been maneuvering a currently deflamed Kasai into position around the back of the camp, letting the wire-connected plate slither along the ground like a snake to get behind the confused captain. After all, the deception was all to catch him unawares, as samurai relentlessly trained themselves to sense the presence of chakra. Even trying to figure out just what the hell was going on, he nearly caught onto her ambush in time. As it was, he was a hair too slow. Expecting a human target, his blade stabbed harmlessly through Kasai's wires, even as the puppet enveloped him, large gauntlets locking into place and forcing him into dropping his sword. In moments he was completely restrained inside of Kasai, and with a flick of her finger Hanabi could release the hidden spikes to either paralyze or kill him. It was an awfully intoxicating position to be in, and she had to force her fingers to remain still as the disguised dummies finished up with the remaining samurai. Only then did she drop down from her hiding spot and walk towards the captured captain, grinning at a flawlessly executed plan. She could see how Naruto had grown addicted to this. Seeing something spun from her imagination so neatly slot into reality was incredible. Gaisu. Naruto's voice ripped her out of her brief indulgence, making her turn and look at the blade inches from her neck. A samurai had been playing dead, something she would have noticed if she hadn't dropped her guard, or her Byakugan. The only thing halting that steel before it took her head off were the invisible strings spooling from Naruto's fingers, locking the man in position. Some lessons, like the fact that no plan is flawless, or to never drop your guard, sometimes need to be learned the hard way, her sensei mused, forcing a little more chakra into his technique to force the samurai to bring his blade back and up to his own throat. But not that hard. Or, at least, that's what his Jasu should have done. Instead, as the samurai was forced to move at Naruto's whims, tiny little shrubs sprouted from wherever a chakra string touched his body. Both student and teacher blinked at this in confusion. What the? Naruto stepped up to the samurai, and forced more chakra through the connection, watching incredulously as the shrubs grew into branches. Whatever this transformation was, it spread, even as the samurai's features twisted and distorted. Eventually both of them were looking at some strange white-skinned creature that was vaguely human, save for its green hair, the little spiky protrusions on its shoulders, and the aforementioned shrubbery growing across its body. It struggled against Naruto's manipulations, before letting out a pained groan as its entire body rapidly transformed. Eventually, Naruto and Hanabi were staring at a small tree sprouting incongruously at the center of the clearing, half of the creature's body still sticking out like some macabre art installation. What the hell is that? Hanabi eventually managed to say. I have no idea, Naruto answered slowly, adopting that expression Hanabi knew meant that he in fact did have an idea, but he was still figuring it out. She knew better than to pry when he was like that. Just another question that needs asked, I suspect. He turned back to the captured captain, still immobilized within Kasai's wiry embrace. Shall we get some answers? The rest of their mission passed peacefully, with the procession remaining unmolested. Unfortunately, the motive behind the attack remained unclear. The captain of the supposedly rogue group of samurai was anything but, he was just corrupt. With shinobi as the primary resource for politicking nobles, and standing armies a relic of a bygone era, samurai had come to be mostly a ceremonial retinue. It made sense then for a few restless captains to hire out the companies as mercenary forces on the cheap. This one, a dark-haired man by the name of Isunboshi, had been doing so for years, and had quite streamlined the process. He didn't even know who his client was. He had simply been paid half his fee by a courier with implicit instructions contained within a calligraphed letter, which, unfortunately, he had proceeded to burn. All he knew was that he was to attack this procession, making sure everyone was dead. He had been told nothing about a shinobi guard. This hadn't really told Naruto all that much except that this shadowy benefactor preferred his business discreet. The motive was also unclear. What was to happen after the young noble was killed? Was it a message? Was it supposed to be gussied up as a preemptive strike from the land of fangs? Had the noble simply pissed off somebody he really shouldn't? Unfortunately, the kid seemed just as clueless as the captain as to who might be orchestrating it all. It left Naruto with a lot to mull over by the time they made it back to Konoha, mission complete. The Hokage seemed just as perplexed, and if Naruto was honest, he was more than happy to leave that particular puzzle to somebody with far more experience in circumnavigating the political theater. He was far more interested by the other thing they had discovered. After the strange incident with the transforming samurai, Naruto had tried to replicate it on the other dead or incapacitated soldiers. 3 more of them had turned into those strange white creatures. He also shared this with the Hokage, but neglected to mention that he had sealed their florified corpses and brought them back with him. They were much too interesting, and he wanted to get a bit of testing on them before he sent a few discrete samples to the hospital. The things were at least partly organic after all, and he wasn't exactly an expert on studying DNA, unless it was ways of twisting it into balls of yarn through judicious use of poison. He walked through his doors, still deep in thought on the matter, absently tossing his flak jacket onto its peg. Already he felt the sweet pangs of sleep calling to him. It had been late when they made it back, and his stomach was full of celebratory ramen after taking Hanabi out to Ichiraku's to commemorate their first C rank. Hopefully the first of many, if the report was adequate for the Hokage. He pushed his fatigue to the side and descended the steps to his workshop, trying not to yawn as he collapsed into his desk chair. Thankfully, the sudden rush of information crowding his head, as the clone he left behind to deal with his paperwork popped, instantly snapped him awake. Nothing interesting to note, although a few previously innocuous notes that might have drifted past him before suddenly stood out. The young noble's words on how differently the daimyo had been acting echoed in his thoughts. Ever since the man's wife passed, taking with her the demonic cat that was the bane of a young genin's life, he had been making more savvy decisions. He had chalked it up to a mixture of grief, and his advisors being able to act without catering to the man's asinine vanity. He couldn't help but agree with that young samurai's assessment of their nation's leader. He really was a buffoon. The limited interaction he had with Ponce was more than enough, and the only direct recognition he had received in that regard was a summon to the capital, addressed to the puppet ninja. More than anything it was galling, because Naruto had finally earned a kick-ass epithet, and nobody used it. What was the point of being called Tashi no Naruto in the bingo book, if he was just going to be that puppet guy? Putting the vexing notion of spoiled nobles and the disregard for basic shinobi courtesy, he leaned back in his chair with a yawn, having mostly processed the information from his clone. As he stretched, he caught sight of the list of remaining Akatsuki, particularly the blank sheet he had in place of Zetsu's image. All he had to go on for that one was Sasori's words that he was some kind of plant creature, and, apparently, a cannibal. He had entertained the possibility that what he had accidentally stumbled upon was Zetsu himself, but dismissed it. For one, he had recovered multiple of whatever those things were. Secondly, he deemed it unlikely that a member of the Akatsuki would be so pitifully weak. Far more plausible, his brain supplied, was the idea that they were a form of clone technique. But then, what kind of clone died? All Bunshin techniques were simply weak copies, lasting as long as the chakra that supplied them, and enough damage always destroyed the elemental medium. He hoped his analysis would bring him some answers, or failing that, the hospitals, but he knew better than to work on a sleepy mind and hauled himself back out of his chair. It was good to know that deciding to become a teacher wouldn't suddenly take away from the excitement in his life, as a small part of him had feared. Although, whether or not that boded well for him remained to be seen. Thoughts of strange plant men eventually faded into the background as the months ground on. Little other evidence turned up, and Naruto couldn't glean anything from the samples he tested other than the fact that the cells reacted with chakra to transform into plant life. The only thing even remotely close to it would be the Shodai's Mokuton, but unless Senju Hashirama procreated with a tub of white sludge, he was stumped. The hospital still hadn't gotten back to him with anything conclusive, so the whole matter was put on the back burner. Instead, he focused on Hanabi's training as the pair tore through C rank after C rank. Nothing as wild or strange as their first, but all completed to a more than satisfactory level. Like he had said, being a teacher was a new experience for him, but he felt he had gotten the hang of it. As each mission progressed, he felt more and more comfortable taking the back seat and letting Hanabi do her thing. He was always there, like an ever-present safety net, but he tried not to get in her way. That didn't mean she wasn't above coming to him and asking for advice, and he was more than happy to let her know how he might do things in her place. Never asserting his own position as the right way was key. He knew better than most that there were 1,001 ways to tackle any given situation. If he could, he only ever pointed out how she could make her own plans just that little bit more efficient. On the training front, it was much the same. He had quickly found out that puppeteering was unlike other styles, in that he could teach the basics, but not much else. Once Hanabi knew how to craft and control her puppets, it was really up to her how she refined her style. He was more of a mirror, something for her to test herself against. It was sort of like being a glorified scratching post, but there was no denying she was getting better. It was all about installing the correct mindset, to think laterally and adapt. He provided the tools, but it was Hanabi that decided how to use them. Currently, they were on their way back from a relatively standard courier mission. It was only worth a ninja's time because the package in question was being delivered through a region that was actively hostile to its origin point. All they had to deal with were a few bandits. Naruto didn't even have to lift a finger. Hanabi was really coming along with Kasai, and he knew that soon she would make a go at her next major puppet. She just needed the correct motivation. How would you feel about entering the Chunin exams? He asked out of the blue, bringing Hanabi up short on their leisurely stroll back to the village. Wait, seriously, she said, glancing at him warily to see if this was one of his jokes. He seemed genuine, but she could never truly tell. You think I'm ready? I think you're more than ready, to be honest. It's a question of whether or not you think you're ready. I won't lie, the Chunin exams can be dangerous. He smothered a sigh, thinking back to his own ill-fated exams. But as you are, I can't think of a challenge they could throw at you that you wouldn't be prepared for. He caught her uncertainty and quickly added, they're still not for another month, so there's no rush. I thought you needed to be in a team to participate. She asked, clearly avoiding an answer. You do, but there's a system for that. Teams don't make it though, the exams after all, individuals do. Teams that had a member promoted get paired up with similarly stranded applicants. Ebisu actually approached me about having you fill in the gap on his team. With Udon and Mogi, she knew them distantly, they were in the year above her in the academy. Now that she thought about it, she vaguely remembered Konohamaru bragging about his promotion. I suppose that could work. Despite appearances, the two weren't pushovers, although she wasn't used to operating in a team of peers. You'd have a bit of time to get used to them beforehand, Naruto offered as if reading our mind, with a quick amendment of, if you want, of course. So that would be it for us then. That's how it works, right? I become a Chunin and you stop being my teacher. He surprised her by placing a hand over his heart, giving a crocodile pout. I didn't know you felt that way, Hanabi-chan. Are you trying to get rid of your dear sensei already? She slapped him on the arm irritably. Shut it, idiot, I thought you were the one trying to get rid of me. He rolled his eyes in exaggerated exasperation. Hanabi, you're not just my student, you're my apprentice. There's nothing stopping us continuing our training after you're promoted. Hell, have you seen the way Jiraiya acts around the Sandaime? Sensei once, sensei for life. Oh, she muttered abashedly. The blonde snorted. Look at you, acting like you might not have anything left to learn from me. As long as I'm still kicking, I'm going to be the undisputed master of puppetry. He grinned as she just hit him again, avoiding his eye. Shut up, I get it already. So it's not as big a deal as I thought it would be. She glanced up, having recovered some of her dignity. So where are they being held this? She trailed off, noting how Naruto's grin had vanished. She barely had time to yelp in surprise as he pushed her back, throwing her across the road and out of the way of the enormous snake that bust from the earth. Naruto may not have been the fastest shinobi around, but his reflexes were superb, and his natural instincts for danger were nothing to scoff at. He kicked off the snake's lower jaw and launched himself into the air above it, observing it carefully as it continued to writhe its way out of the ground. He did the calculations in his head and smirked, bringing his arm up almost lazily. The latest iteration of his wrist launcher was a sleek contraption of matte metal, hooked onto a thick, fingerless glove on his right hand. The various different ammunition came from the flexible black cloth that wound its way up his right arm in a spiral. The coloring was to hide the countless seals scrawled up its length that allowed the entire mechanism to function. He flicked his wrist and a small tube, no wider than a Ryo coin, jutted out from the device. With another thought, it immediately belched out a white-hot stream of fire that turned blue at the source when Naruto increased the intensity. The snake let out a horrific squealing noise as its body was engulfed in flame, killing it so quickly that it didn't even have a chance to return to its summoning realm. And Naruto made no mistake, it was definitely a summon. He had seen some big snakes in his day, but nothing natural could grow to that size and sustain itself. The question remained then, as he landed back on the blackened grass, of whose pet this was. Unless he had done something heinous to Mitarashi Anko without being aware of it, there was only one other snake summoner alive. Ku, that didn't even force you to use one of your puppets, a soft, almost effeminate voice called out that sent a chill down the spine of everybody present. How disappointing. I suppose I'll just have to try harder, won't I? Naruto turned calmly to the source of the voice, stepping between it and Hanabi without thinking. You know, I always expected you would have some kind of sibilant hiss in your voice. Or is that a bit too cliché for you, Orochimaru? The snake Sannin chuckled to himself as he slipped out of the shadow of the treeline, golden eyes eyeing up Naruto with an unmistakable glint of interest. So quick with the wit, aren't you, Naruto-kun? You remind me a great deal of Jiraiya. Naruto's lip twitched at that. I damn well hope not. I prefer not getting myself beaten up every other day by irate women. You shouldn't be so quick to dismiss my former teammate. Orochimaru countered. As much as it galls me to admit, he is an incredibly powerful ninja. His slitted eyes seemed to zone in on the blonde, widening along with his smirk. As a you, I see. I hadn't expected you to be so proficient with the chakra strings that you could manipulate your puppets without moving your fingers. Now I understand how one such as you was able to deal with my old partner. An abnormally long tongue darted from his mouth to lick along his lips. Thank you for that, by the way. The Akatsuki was ever so much a nuisance. He shifted languidly in place, glancing down at the ground with an amused smile. Are we really going to continue with this? I can see the trap you're setting all too clearly. Naruto looked up again, irritated at his apparent transparency, only to start in shock. Orochimaru's golden eyes had shifted, morphing into the familiar red pulls of the Sharingan. Do you like them, Naruto-kun? I suppose I owe you my thanks in that regard. Once I struggled so vainly to capture myself a suitable host and obtain these Sharingan eyes, but with the dissolution of the Akatsuki, I found a much more elegant solution. It's incredible what friends can do with one another, isn't it, Zetsu-kun? An oily silhouette slid from the forest, barely discernible from the surrounding shadows. A featureless man, entirely black save for his two solid green eyes, slid up to Orochimaru's side. I believe we agreed to keep my presence undetected, Orochimaru, he rasped in a dark, unnatural voice that didn't seem to originate from any human vocal cords. Now where's the fun in that? The pale nuke nin drawled slowly. I much prefer to lay all my cards on the table, like these absolutely sublime cells you provided me with. To reduce the immune rejection to 0%. Why, I couldn't have done it without you. Then stop wasting time and fulfill your end of the bargain. Zetsu hissed impatiently, his form seeming to shift at the edges to match his anxiety. All in due time, Zetsu. I do believe Naruto-kun has something to say first. No sooner had he started talking than a figure slid out of the ground from behind, parting the earth like water. Inari was grace personified, already spinning around with wicked claws extended. Orochimaru easily caught them on a kunai, grinning widely with excitement. There was a shriek of metal as the two clashed for a fraction of a second before Inari twisted her body, bringing her foot up as if to axe-kick the snake Sannin. Instead, in a feat of inhuman dexterity, she kicked down and used the momentum to slam her tails down on Orochimaru's guard. The ground under his feet immediately cratered, and even Zetsu was pushed back from the sheer force of the shockwave. Orochimaru looked unperturbed, still grinning. Oh yes, this is quite marvelous. I had been wanting an excuse to test these magnificent eyes and I believe you will do just fine. Inari continued her movement, an arched foot touching the ground for just long enough to find purchase before vanishing in a flicker of movement. Hanabi could only watch on, agape at how fast the fox puppet moved. She had never seen Naruto use her to such an extent before, and for the first time truly understood how outclassed she was by her sensei, and how easy he took it on her in training. The nine-tailed construct was a blur of motion, only visible when she clashed with Orochimaru as a streak of white or a scatter of sparks. Despite that though, it seemed nothing she could do would slip past the pale ninja. His eyes were similar blurs, tracking the puppet wherever she went and preempting her lightning-fast strikes. Naruto had a look of intense concentration that Hanabi had never seen before, fingers moving in barely visible flickers of motion. Inari suddenly struck low, flattening her body against the ground as a clawed foot lashed out with enough strength to take Orochimaru's knee off. The slippery nuke nin moved to deflect it, only for one of Inari's tails to bristle. The kunai lurched out of his hand, sticking to the tip of the tail. He was instead forced to jump back, but the moment he left the ground, and therefore his leverage, Inari was on him. She launched forward, pouncing like the animal she was based on, with her arms extended to either side. When she swung them together, the fingers detached, connected to long file-textured prehensile cables, a mechanism carried forward from Ramia. They would have ensnared Orochimaru, if the man didn't launch his tongue out to ridiculous lengths, wrap it around a tree and use it to pull himself out of harm's way. Another of Inari's tails bristled and the tip instantly whipped around to track the man, spewing a rapid-fire stream of senbon that seemed to form an unbroken silvery streak in the air. The trees behind the Sannin were completely shredded as his ducked and dived around the deadly hail, always just a step ahead of the next needle. But that wasn't the purpose, they were just corralling him in a certain direction. He passed by the tree that a clone had laden with explosive tags, but a moment before Naruto could set it off, Orochimaru slid into the ground, vanishing and re-emerging next to Zetsu again. He didn't so much as look ruffled by the entire exchange. My, he said, eyes shifting back to the usual golden hue, you have grown strong haven't you, Naruto-kun? That was most informative, for myself. These eyes have already picked apart the weakness in your construction. Each tail holds a separate function, but you can only use one at a time, no. Naruto just flexed his hands, moving Inari back over to his side as watched the Sannin warily. It's only a weakness if you can take advantage of it. Although it was true. Each of Inari's tails held a chakra system, but only one could connect to the rest of the puppet at a time, otherwise it became overloaded. He could still control all of the tails at once, just not their hidden weapons. So far, it hadn't become an issue, and he'd hoped to overcome the limitation before it did. Too true, Orochimaru admitted with a smirk. But I find my interest waning, I believe I already have everything I need. Zetsu turned to him, eyes narrowing. What are you talking about, Orochimaru? You promised me the Jinchuriki. Oh Zetsu-kun, the pale ninja drawled, patting the featureless figure's shoulder consolingly. You should know better by now who to make deals with. You see, I am far more intrigued by you. The inky creature made to respond, only to find himself completely immobilized. The entirely black nature of his body hid the seals snaking their way across his form, completely freezing him in place. All of this was just a distraction to catch you off guard, and it appears to have worked wonderfully, don't you think? Orochimaru smiled, rubbing his tongue across his canines. Ever since the Akatsuki, I have been just dying to know what made you tick. Without the threat of pain hanging over my head, I'll have all the time in the world to understand you, my unique little friend. He glanced up at Naruto, still eyeing him warily with Inari tensed at his side. Apologies for the deception, Naruto-kun, I hope you understand how these things go. Do continue to grow stronger. I'm ever so curious to see just how far you can go with Sasori's old hobby. He grinned at how the comment incensed the blonde. But, in case you were harboring any ideas of following me, I believe a gift is in order. His hands came up and Inari shot forward at the exact same moment, but Orochimaru was just the slightest bit faster. His hands slammed down, calling out, Kuchios, Edo Tensei. And Inari instead slammed into a thick gray coffin that rose from the ground, not even denting it. She skipped back as it opened, allowing a single figure to stumble out. His skin was ashen gray and cracked like desiccated earth, but the aristocratic features, pale eyes and seal tattooed across his forehead were unmistakable. Uncle Hisashi. Hanabi called out timidly, eyes going wide at the sight of a man she had only ever seen photos of. The man himself merely blinked slowly, not quite seeming all there until Orochimaru abruptly stepped forward, forcing a ceiling tag attached to a kunai into the back of Hisashi's head. The cracks across his body immediately sealed up and the color returned to his skin, making him appear just as he had right before his untimely death. What's going on? He asked, glancing around in confusion as the coffin sank back into the earth behind him. Enjoy the family reunion, Orochimaru called out as he stepped back. Before anyone could react, he lurched forward and, in what had to rank as one of the most disgusting things Naruto had ever seen, swallowed Zetsu whole. Not even looking bloated from his grotesque meal, Orochimaru flickered in a blur of motion to escape. Inari hadn't been idle through this though, and Naruto was used to working through a lot more than simple disgust. The fox puppet matched Orochimaru's speed and moved to cut him off before he could get away, only for her tails to crash into a rotating sphere of pure chakra. They ground against it for a moment, neither budging, before her lack of leverage forced the puppet back. The sphere of chakra, looking like an oversized Rasengan, slowed, revealing Hisashi at its center, looking puzzled. My body moved on its own, he muttered, staring down at his hands in confusion. Orochimaru had used the clash to vanish into thin air, so he instead looked to the remaining occupants of the clearing. What's going on here? Uncle Hisashi, is that really you? Hanabi asked, stepping forward. The man only had to look at her once before his eyes widened in recognition. Hanabi-chan. You're. When I saw you last you were just a newborn in your mother's arms. You've grown up so much, and, his eyes trailed up, narrowing slightly before his shoulders slumped. And you've fallen to the curse of the Hyuga as well. No, she exclaimed, moving forward animatedly with Naruto just a step behind, regarding the entire exchange tersely. No, things are better now uncle, look. She gestured to her seal, grinning proudly as he took in the differences to his own. Sama has changed things. The seal is no longer a tool for subjugation, but a symbol of our unity. Hisashi regarded the marking with shock, almost unable to believe it. Hisashi, his head came up, eyes widening. My son, Neji. Hanabi was immediately stopped cold, her mouth opening wordlessly. She had no idea what to say, mind reeling over her complicity in Neji's year-long imprisonment. She couldn't hide her emotions from her uncle's Byakugan, but thankfully Naruto stepped in front of her, face a mask. Unfortunately, the original seal cannot be removed. It will take time for the Hyuga to be healed entirely. Hisashi's gaze turned to him. I remember you, Uzumaki Naruto. You're Hanabi-chan's sensei now. It really has been a long time. It never did settle well with me, the village's treatment of you. I always saw such similarities between the Burden and the branch family of the Hyuga, shared. And your posthumous concern is most appreciated, the blonde short back dryly. Then it's true that I'm dead, and this is some kind of technique. I had feared as much when control of my body was wrested from me. Even now, I feel the unnatural urge to fight the both of you. Even before my death, I had heard of some of Orochimaru's monstrous deeds, but to force the dead back from the pure world like this. He slowly settled back into a perfect Jukan stance, eyes turned down. I apologize for this, but it appears I have no choice. Hanabi stepped forward, drawing Kasai's scroll from her sleeve, only for Naruto to step forward and raise his hand. Hanabi, stay out of this. But, he turned, and there was such ferocity in his eyes that she found her voice conspicuously absent. As your sensei, I order you to stay out of this. It's too dangerous. Against that stare all she could do was wilt and step back. It was a good thing too, as at that moment the compulsion grew too strong and Hisashi lurched forward. He was forced to veer off mid-sprint though, unable to close the distance as Inari slammed in from the side. Her tails came around in a vicious arc and Hisashi's hands were reduced to blurs in his efforts to fend them off. In the next instant, both planted their feet and began the taijutsu in earnest. Naruto knew the Jukan almost as well as a natural-born practitioner, thanks to his extensive sparring with Hinata and his own perusal of the clan scrolls after acquiring them for Hanabi. Still, fighting Hisashi was on a whole different level than his niece. It was clear where Neji had inherited his talent. He had to keep Inari's hands wreathed in chakra to prevent them going limp at his touch, as the Jukan could be just as damaging to one of his puppets as it was to a human. He could flood the Tenketsu and restore them, but it would cost precious moments in a fight as heated as this. Of course, Inari wasn't his most dangerous puppet for her taijutsu alone. Making sure both were locked in as fast-paced a conflict as possible, one of her tails stretched up and over her shoulder. There was an inaudible whir from within the appendage as the ammunition was switched over, followed by a much louder roar as an intense jet of fire burst from the tip. Hisashi instinctively jumped back, already twisting his body for the chitin, and the white-hot flame splashed against the technique. Naruto only held it there for a moment. The stream cut off and Inari shot forward, tails planting into the ground behind her like furry pilings. Her claws lengthened and with a near-rending screech she jammed them right into the rotating sphere of the Hyuga's most famous defensive technique. For a moment, it seemed like it would hold, but Inari simply set her stance lower, clawed feet digging into the ground. The artificial muscles in her arms tensed and, to Hanabi's astonishment, large rents were gouged from the technique, like she was splitting a stream of water and not a grinding maelstrom of pure energy. It was enough to destabilize the chitin. Hisashi was thrown back and out of his own technique, surprise evident on his face as Inari pounced through the lingering wisps of chakra. Her tail speared forward, impaling the formerly deceased Hyuga across his body at key joints. Uncle! Hanabi called out in alarm. Hisashi just smiled at her though, turning his head and nodding thankfully at Naruto as Inari carefully set him down again. Thank you. I can scarcely imagine the pain it would have caused me to fight my niece. However, he blinked in confusion when he didn't feel any kind of release. Instead, white flakes of what looked to be ash began congealing across his form, healing wounds that should have been fatal. He stood, looking as good as new, and resettled into his stance with a troubled expression. Just what kind of technique is this? I don't even feel tired from using the chitin twice in quick succession, and now I heal from mortal wounds. Naruto just grimaced as Inari readied herself again. A troublesome one. Let me help, Hanabi said, staring at her revived uncle with consternation. I said no, Naruto growled forcefully. I have this. I just need to take my own advice and think laterally. So, he couldn't kill Hisashi, clearly, and from the comments he made, he had an extremely large pool of energy to draw upon. Perhaps the healing was limited. What would happen if he destroyed the entire body? No, it was better to assume that if he could heal from mortal wounds, nothing was off the table. After all, something like that didn't come close to the feat of reviving the dead. So, what did you do with something you couldn't kill? Naruto decided to take cues from his father in that regard. If only he knew how to seal a conscious human. Before he could finish his thought, he saw a blue blur streak forward. Kasai shot across the road, leaving a wispy trail of chakra flames in her wake. A few feet from Hisashi it curled into a ball before throwing its body out again, exploding in a wave of blue fire. Hisashi was forced to look away as his Byakugan's vision was overloaded by the blast of pure chakra. Hanabi used the hesitation to get Kasai close, slipping around her uncle's Juken with the familiarity only a Hyuga could possess. Hisashi wasn't defenseless though, and struck out with a deeply ingrained precision of countless years' hard training. However, he was unused to Kasai's sinuous form, the chakra wires composing its body slipping around his attacks as the puppet latched onto his body bit by bit until he was entirely encased inside, once again immobilized. Hanabi panted at Naruto's side, smiling defiantly. Expelling so much chakra from Kasai at once always drained her, but she knew just how blinding it could be to a Byakugan from that range. She turned around to Naruto, still grinning. See, I told you I could. Hanabi, be careful. Hisashi called out. I can still Yukenho, Ichigekishin. Kasai exploded outward, the individual sections ripped from their chakra wire tethers and scattered across the road. Before Hisashi's feet even touched the ground he was flying forward, extended fingertips practically glowing with chakra. Get back, he called out, unable to fight the Edo Tensei's compulsion. But Hanabi was frozen in place, shocked at the brutal destruction of her puppet and the sight of her uncle barreling down on her. She would have stayed there, if Naruto didn't push her out of the way, putting himself in her place as Hisashi lashed out. I'm sorry, but you are within my circle of divination. He lashed out, but Naruto's artificial arm was already there to take the strike. 2 palms. Naruto's reflexes were good enough to take the blows on the prosthetic. 4 palms. Both of them became blurs of motion as Naruto was forced to take a step back, face knotted in concentration. 8 pa. That was as far as Hisashi got before Inari slammed into him from behind, hitting him first with one tail, then another on top of that, then another, until all 9 tails struck him atop one another in rapid succession. The aggregate of all that force compiled into one horrendously powerful blow that sent Hisashi careening across the road, only stopping after he plowed through 3 trees in a row. He was forced to lay there as ash swirled about his body, healing the gaping crater that used to be his right side. Naruto just grunted as he flexed his prosthesis, flushing chakra through it until the few tenketsu Hisashi had managed to close reopened. That would have seriously hurt if it was still flesh. Good for something, huh? He muttered at the arm, flexing it again to make sure he had full mobility. Naruto-sensei, Hanabi started to apologize from the ground, only for Naruto to round on her, eyes steely and flat. I said, stay back, he repeated, and this time his tone brokered no argument. Hisashi, by now, had pulled himself together and was once again advancing. But Naruto was done strategizing. Inari dropped down to all fours and sprinted forward, looking more fox than woman. Vicious curved blades slide from her elbows, away from her forearms, and her tails bristled until each individual hair hardened into lethal point. The poison coating them was, of course, useless against somebody that could regenerate endlessly, but the spikes themselves made them much more dangerous as weapons. She was a flurrying of motion, flying in and out of Hisashi's guard almost faster than the prodigal Hyuga could keep up with. It was like watching an Inuzuka in full swing, only a lot sharper and with a lot more limbs. Tails flared out like snakes, lashing and rending anything they could reach as Inari personally batted away Hisashi's Juken strikes with her hands. It was clear Hisashi was becoming desperate with his movements, or at least, the Edo Tensei was. He suffered a vicious and otherwise mortal wound across his neck to bring both palms forward, shouting, Hakaku Heikisho. They were sent skidding back from one another by the force of the double palm strike, a visible ripple of air rushing past Inari causing the trees behind her to groan. The puppet herself left long rents in the ground as her clawed feet tore through the road surface in an effort to stay upright, but was ultimately undamaged herself. Hisashi's body seemed ready to spring right back into it, but he only found himself blinking in confusion, body unmoving. What has been done to me? He couldn't even move his head down, so he used his Byakugan to observe himself. He was shocked to see a network of tightly scrawled seals crawling across his body. Whenever he tried to move, they pulsed and forced his body to be still. Sorry about the sloppiness, it's not exactly my best work, Naruto said as he finally allowed Inari to relax, walking over to the immobilized Hyuga. It's not like I carry around seals designed to stop immortal, infinitely regenerating zombies. This, he tapped the seal, is a bastardized version of the sealing matrix I used to control some of my earlier puppets, only reversed. When you put chakra in, it halts movement instead of causing it. Hisashi would have nodded in understanding if he could, but settled for a thankful smile. And since shinobi unconsciously use chakra in all of their movements, it completely immobilized me. Naruto just continued to look apologetic as Hanabi slunk over to his side, head low. I'm afraid that's all I can do. I have no idea how to cancel this. Hisashi's eyes flitted down to his niece, who hesitantly met them. At least it has not been all bad. It relieves me to know that the cursed fate of my family has been relieved, and I am proud to see the young woman my niece has become. His smile grew slightly bemused. As headstrong and willful as her mother. She could never sit back and watch a fight when she felt she could do something either. Although, you should listen to your sensei. At that he turned his eyes to Naruto. Thank you for looking after my family, he closed his eyes, sighing peacefully. It seems Orochimaru has released the technique, I can feel its hold on me fading as we speak. Must have realized it wasn't worth keeping you around anymore, Naruto guessed, watching as the color slowly drained from Hisashi's features, body breaking up and drifting away as ash. It was good to see you, little firecracker, he said, voice beginning to sound distant as more and more of him vanished. If you could, tell my brother that I forgive him, and let Neji know that his father still loves him, and to walk in the light, proud to be a Hyuga. And with those parting words he finished dissolving, leaving behind a dead Zetsu clone in a pile of ashes. The vessel for Hisashi's soul, Naruto would imagine. He allowed Hanabi a minute to process everything, before turning on a heel and continuing their walk back to Konoha. There was no point pursuing Orochimaru, he was long gone. Come on, time to go. Hanabi hesitated a moment before turning and trailing along behind him without a word. That will be it for this video. If you want more, comment down below, like, subscribe. And see you guys later.